My wife laughed before anyone else did, and somehow that hurt worse than the joke. The private dining room at Mercer's Steakhouse glowed under soft amber lights, the kind of place where every table looked like it belonged in a magazine and every man in a tailored suit spoke like he had already won. Outside, Chicago was wrapped in a cold November rain, tapping against the tall windows like fingers asking to be let in. Inside, the air smelled of charred ribeye, polished wood, and expensive confidence. Emily sat beside me in a navy dress I had watched her choose for 20 minutes in our bedroom mirror. She looked beautiful. She always did in rooms like that. Shoulders back, chin lifted, smile sharp enough to open doors. Across from us sat Richard Bennett, CEO of Bennett & Cole Infrastructure, calm and silver-haired, with the kind of silence powerful men carry because they know people will wait for them to speak. Around him were executives, project leads, finance people, and Brad Lawson, the man who had spent the first half hour pretending I was invisible and the next 15 minutes making sure everyone knew I was not. I had come because Emily asked me to. No, that is not honest. She had not asked. She had told me it would look better if I came, like I was a cuff link or a watch, something that completed the outfit but did not need to speak. The dinner was supposed to celebrate the final stage of a contract her division had chased for 9 months, a logistics and supply agreement tied to highway expansion, bridge work, and municipal upgrades across the Midwest. $48 million, according to the number she had repeated into her phone so many times our kitchen walls could have quoted it back. She wanted this deal. Needed it, maybe. I had watched her live on Coffee, late calls, and clipped sentences for months, and I had tried to be proud of her. I still was, in the quiet way husbands are proud when nobody is looking. Then Brad raised his glass, leaned back in his chair, and gave me the grin of a man who thought cruelty was charm. So, Michael, he said, loud enough for the whole table to turn, what exactly do you do these days? Emily told us you're between things. A few people smiled politely. Emily's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. I waited for her to correct him. She knew the truth, or at least enough of it to avoid that phrase. Between things. Like I was a couch waiting to be moved. I set my water glass down carefully. I consult a little, I said. Mostly from home. Brad's grin widened. From home. Right. That's the dream, isn't it? Let the wife conquer the world while you manage the grocery list. A couple of laughs broke loose at the far end of the table. Small ones at first. Nervous ones. The kind people use when they are not sure whether they are allowed to enjoy someone else's embarrassment. Then Emily laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly enough for anyone else to call it cruel. Just a soft, polished laugh, followed by a sentence she probably thought would rescue me. Brad, don't be mean. Michael tries. He just never cared much for the corporate battlefield. There it was. Not defense. Translation. She had taken the insult, folded it neatly, and handed it back with her perfume on it. The laughter grew warmer after that. Permission had been granted. I looked down at the white tablecloth, at the reflection of the overhead light in my knife, at the faint ring of condensation spreading under my glass. My voice stayed where I put it, low and steady. It's true, I said. I've never liked battlefields that announce themselves. Richard Bennett's eyes moved to me then. Not sharply, not with surprise. More like a man checking a clock he already knew was running. Brad missed it. Men like Brad usually do. He turned to Emily, lifted his glass again, and said, well, thank God one Carter knows how to close a deal. That got the biggest laugh of the night. Emily smiled into it, cheeks bright, eyes shining with the hunger of someone close to a prize. I watched her enjoy the room. I watched her choose them over me in real time, not with a kiss or a confession or some dramatic betrayal, but with a laugh. Sometimes that is all it takes. A laugh can sign papers the hand never touches. Across the table, beside Richard's leather folio, sat a dark blue contract binder with the Bennett & Cole seal, pressed into the cover. Emily had glanced at it 3 times since dessert arrived. Brad had glanced at it 6. I had not looked at it until then because I already knew what was inside. I knew the revised indemnity clause on page 14. I knew the supplier performance schedule in Exhibit C. I knew the final approval line had been left blank on purpose. I knew because 7 days earlier, in a quiet conference room 30 floors above LaSalle Street, my attorney had slid that same binder across a table and asked whether I wanted to proceed with Emily's company despite the concerns in their proposal. I had said I wanted to attend the dinner first. Not to punish her. Not to embarrass anyone. I wanted to see the people behind the numbers. Numbers can be cleaned. Presentations can be polished. Character shows up when people think nobody important is in the room. Emily did not know that Carter Holdings controlled the supply trust behind the deal. She did not know that after 12 years of building, selling, restructuring, and disappearing from the spotlight, I still held the vote that mattered. She did not know Richard Bennett had called me personally and said, "Michael, before we sign, I want you to meet the team your wife is bringing to my table." So I came. I wore the gray suit Emily said made me look less tired. I shook hands. I listened. And for almost an hour, I let them tell me exactly who they were. Brad leaned forward again, warmed by laughter and bourbon. "Come on, Mike," he said, using a name I had not offered him. No shame in it. Some guys build companies. Some guys build, I don't know, pantry shelves. Emily touched his arm lightly. "Stop," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. That was the second cut. Richard closed his menu. The sound was soft, almost nothing, but I heard it. So did the room, somehow. Conversations thinned. Silverware paused. Rain traced the windows behind him. He looked at Brad first, then Emily, then finally at me. I did not move. My hands rested open on the table. My heart was steady now, not because I felt nothing, but because the part of me that used to beg to be understood had finally sat down. Brad gave one last chuckle and nodded toward the blue binder. "Maybe when we sign this thing, we can get Michael here to carry the briefcase." That was when Richard Bennett stood up. The room shifted around me, not in sound, but in density. Conversations that had been light and buzzing now seemed muffled, as if gravity itself had thickened over the polished oak tables. I adjusted my chair quietly, the leather creaking under weight I barely acknowledged, and watched as Emily straightened, leaning into her own confidence. She smiled at Brad, a grin that said, "I am in charge here, and the whole world should recognize it." I sipped the water in front of me, tasting only cold clarity. I had no desire to defend myself. There was nothing to prove. The real proof, the one that mattered, sat in the blue binder beside Richard Bennett, untouched, waiting. Richard's presence was quiet authority incarnate. He did not nod. He did not look at anyone with impatience. He simply observed, and that observation carried more weight than any reprimand Brad could have thrown across the table. Emily did not see it. She could not. Her vision was occupied entirely with performance, appearance, the subtle play of power she thought she controlled. I had learned long ago that the appearance of control is only as strong as the one who is really watching. I leaned back, placing my hands loosely on the table, fingers barely touching, a posture of calm patience. I let Brad fill the room with noise, let Emily believe she had orchestrated this tableau perfectly. Every laugh he elicited, every pointed comment, I cataloged. Details, nuance, small gestures that would become important later. My gaze swept the room, noting who followed cues, who laughed without conscience, who mirrored Emily's calculated smiles. Nothing escaped me. Across the table, Richard shifted his gaze ever so slightly toward me. I caught it. That single glance was more information than the entire half hour of brash words from Brad. He had seen, had understood, and the moment he chose to act would be decisive. Emily, unaware of the currents flowing beneath the surface, continued her performance, guiding conversation, dropping references to deadlines and deliverables with precision, her hands moving gracefully across wine glass stems and silverware. She thought she was in command. She thought she had bent the table to her will. But influence, the true kind, is measured in what you cannot see. My mind traced the history of the deal, the months of negotiation, the spreadsheets and memos she had assumed she controlled. Every page, every clause, every signature had already been seen, vetted, and cataloged. The compliance audit that would follow was quietly set in motion. Brad, still oblivious to the magnitude of the moment, cracked another joke about my lack of engagement, and the polite laughter that followed was like waves against a cliff, washing over but unable to move the rock beneath. I did not flinch. I did not speak. I only observed. In that observation, I prepared myself. I knew the timing of the reveal, the exact moment when the room would tilt and the hierarchy would shift, and I allowed every person, every movement, to play its part in a larger pattern. Emily's attention flicked toward me, brief and fleeting, as if sensing a subtle change in energy. She smiled, not understanding, misinterpreting my stillness as uncertainty. That miscalculation was hers. She did not realize that her own confidence would be the vehicle of her revelation. The wine glasses caught the low light, casting reflections that danced along polished wood and cream-colored linens. Each clink of silverware, each sip, each laugh, was a note in a symphony only I could conduct. Richard, patient and silent, shifted slightly in his chair, signaling that the moment was near. My hands remained on the table, relaxed, but my mind was sharp, mapping every possibility, anticipating every reaction. I waited for the exact phrase, the right cadence, the trigger that would allow the power dynamics to invert without theatrics or loud confrontation. The air was thick with expectation, though no one else could sense it. Emily was playing her role, Brad was oblivious to the undercurrents, and Richard knew precisely when the shift would come. I allowed a small smile to form, barely noticeable, as the first wave of consequence began its gentle sweep. Across the room, nothing had been announced. Nothing had been claimed. Yet the balance of authority had begun to shift in silent, imperceptible ways that only those with knowledge and patience could perceive. Every movement, every glance, every word spoken was a calculated part of the unfolding pattern, and I was at the center, steady, calm, and entirely aware of the eventual outcome. Richard Bennett stood slowly, and the first thing I noticed was how little sound the chair made. A powerful man does not have to scrape the floor to get attention. He simply rises, and the room remembers to breathe differently. Brad's smile lingered for half a second longer than it should have, trapped on his face because he had not yet understood the weather had changed. Emily looked from Richard to the blue binder, then back to Richard, her expression polished but tighter now, the way a window looks right before the first crack appears. Richard buttoned his suit jacket with one hand and picked up the binder with the other. "Before we move toward signatures," he said, his voice smooth, patient, and unmistakably final, "I think it is important we clarify who is actually at this table." No one laughed. Even the server by the sideboard froze with a coffee pot in his hand, sensing that whatever was happening had outranked dessert. Brad cleared his throat and leaned forward, trying to reclaim the easy rhythm he had owned all evening. "Absolutely, Richard. Emily can walk you through final delivery capacity, and I can speak to the revised cost structure." Richard did not look at him. That was the first real wound to Brad's confidence. Not a visible one, just the clean absence of attention. Richard's eyes stayed on me. "Mr. Carter," he said, "would you prefer I explain, or would you?" The silence that followed had weight. It settled on every plate, every glass, every folded napkin. Emily turned her head toward me slowly. Not fully, just enough to ask a question her pride would not let her say out loud. I took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough to steady the old ache under my ribs. "Go ahead, Richard," I said. I used his first name, and that tiny detail moved through the table. Like a quiet alarm. Brad blinked. Emily's fingers left the stem of her glass. Richard placed the blue binder in front of me. Not Emily, not Brad, not the finance director who had spent the evening talking over everyone. In front of me. "Bennett and Cole Infrastructure has been negotiating this supply and logistics agreement with Northline Development for nearly 9 months, he said. But the funding structure and preferred vendor network run through Carter Holdings and the Carter Supply Trust." He paused, letting the words land where they needed to land. "Mr. Michael Carter is the controlling trustee." The table went still in a way I had only heard once before, years ago, when a boardroom full of men realized the quiet partner in the corner owned the deciding vote. Emily stared at the binder, then at me, then back at Richard, as if the order of objects might rearrange itself into something less humiliating. Brad gave a short laugh that did not survive past his own mouth. "Wait, I am sorry," he said. "This Michael Carter?" Richard finally looked at him. "Yes, this Michael Carter." There was no anger in his voice. That made it worse. Anger gives people something to push against. Calm gives them nowhere to hide. I saw the moment Brad searched his memory for every joke he had made since we sat down. I saw the color drain from his confidence, not his face exactly, but the performance around it. Emily leaned closer to me and whispered, "Why did you not tell me?" It was almost funny, but not the kind that makes you smile. I turned toward her. "You stopped asking who I was a long time ago." Her eyes tightened, and for the first time that night, she had no polished answer ready. Richard opened the binder and turned to the signature page. The sound of paper moving was louder than it should have been. "The final approval requires Mr. Carter's authorization," he said. "Without it, there is no contract tonight." The finance director swallowed. Someone at the far end of the table lowered a wine glass so carefully it barely touched the cloth. Brad shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by the silverware. I looked at Emily, and I did not see a villain. That would have been easier. I saw my wife. The woman who once sat on the floor of our first apartment eating takeout from paper containers because we could not afford dining chairs. The woman who kissed me outside a bank after my first line of credit was approved and said she knew I would build something real. The woman who, somewhere along the way, began measuring me only by what I no longer displayed. The suit stopped. The office disappeared. My name came off buildings and moved into legal structures she never cared to understand. To her, quiet looked like failure. Home looked like surrender. Love looked like someone she could safely underestimate. Richard slid a pen beside the binder. "Whenever you are ready," he said. Brad tried one last time, because men like him mistake delay for opportunity. "Michael, listen, earlier was just dinner talk. You know how these things go." I looked at him then. Really looked. His smile twitched under the strain of needing forgiveness from a man he had spent an hour reducing to a punchline. "I do know how these things go," I said. "That is why I came." Emily's lips parted. She understood part of it then. Not all. Just enough to be afraid of the rest. I picked up the pen. The weight of it was ordinary. Black lacquer, silver clip, probably less than 2 ounces. Strange how small the tool can be when it changes the shape of a room. I turned to Exhibit C, then to the compliance addendum, and placed the pen tip against the margin without signing. "Before we talk about approval," I said, "we need to talk about the numbers Brad mentioned after the second round of drinks." Brad went completely still. Richard folded his hands in front of him. Emily looked at Brad, and in that single glance, I saw a second story begin to unravel. I let my gaze sweep the room again, slower this time, tracing each detail that Emily had taken for granted. The polished silverware, the gleam on the wine glasses, the soft curve of the candlelight reflecting off her hair, all of it orchestrated to reinforce her authority, her narrative. I remained still, a figure of calm, and watched how her smile faltered ever so slightly when she realized the binder no longer belonged to her. Influence. Richard shifted, leaning forward just enough for the energy of his presence to press subtly across the table. I could feel it without moving. It was a quiet weight, a force that did not announce itself with volume but demanded acknowledgement. The finance director adjusted his jacket nervously, papers rustling in a way that punctuated the tension without sound. Brad fidgeted, trying to reclaim composure, but the invisible gravity had already shifted, and every motion he made betrayed the uncertainty of a man who had miscalculated the room entirely. Emily's fingers tapped the table, soft and rhythmic, as though she were attempting to restore control through repetition, through the small movements that had once anchored her confidence. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to engage my awareness, but not to interrupt. Each breath I took was measured, each blink deliberate, observing the reactions as the undercurrent of authority moved in silence. Richard opened the binder slowly, revealing page after page of meticulous contracts, schedules, and compliance notes, each document a testament to preparation, to foresight, and to the silent power I had maintained while remaining in the background. Emily's eyes widened imperceptibly, recognizing the depth she had never paused to consider, the control she assumed she held that had always been under the stewardship of the very man she underestimated. Brad's voice tried again, a nervous chirp, testing whether the current stillness was fragile or impenetrable. "Michael, are you actually reviewing this tonight?" He swallowed before continuing, the sentence faltering under the weight of the quiet attention in the room. I did not reply. I did not need to. The acknowledgement was already present in the tilt of Richard's head, the way the light fell across the documents, the imperceptible shift in Emily's posture. My hands rested lightly on the table, the faint tremor of anticipation only for me to feel, as if the calm before an unseen wave was the measure of all things. I traced the margin notes with my eyes, reviewing silently, remembering each step that led to this moment. the careful oversight of schedules, the confidential reviews, the meetings conducted in quiet offices where no one thought I was listening, where no one suspected the depth of my involvement. Emily's mouth opened once, as though to interject, but no words emerged. The realization was dawning without explanation, without dramatics, a slow and deliberate awareness that the man she had seated beside her as a token, as an accessory, was in fact the one who controlled the very outcome she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Brad's shifting continued, small adjustments in the chair, the scratch of his pen against the table, minor acts that betrayed his mounting apprehension. I allowed the room to breathe around me. Each pause, each stillness, a testament to the precision of observation and patience. Richard placed a sheet of paper gently in front of me, a procedural step, and yet the gesture carried the weight of decision, of authorization. Emily's eyes flicked from me to the page and back, her expression revealing the internal processing of an unexpected revelation. I reached for the pen, not hurriedly, not with any display of dominance, but with the quiet intention of conducting the next sequence of events deliberately, measured, and irrevocable. The movement drew a collective inhale, subtle, almost imperceptible, but present, a shift in rhythm, a cue that the balance had moved entirely. Emily's hand hovered near her glass, a breath away from touching it, but she did not. The moment demanded reflection. Every executive present recognized that the outcome of the dinner had shifted without grand declarations, without confrontation, yet with absolute clarity. Brad's glance met mine, searching, questioning, faltering in the understanding of how quickly a dynamic could pivot under the influence of preparation, discretion, and hidden authority. I placed the pen lightly, aligning it with the margin, an act both ordinary and decisive. Richard nodded once, subtle but profound. The binder was mine to finalize, the authority in my hands, and the room adjusted around it. Emily's composure remained outwardly intact, but the subtle tension in her shoulders betrayed the dawning comprehension that the hierarchy she had assumed was contingent, fragile, and now quietly overturned. The dining room, once a theater of controlled performance for her benefit, had become a tableau of revelation, observation, and the understated assertion of competence that had always existed, unseen, and now fully acknowledged. Each reflection on glass, each shimmer of candlelight on silverware, each quiet sound in the background reinforced the singular truth. The balance of control was no longer where anyone had expected it to be. I remained calm, observing, aware of the profound stillness and the shift in awareness around me. The unspoken acknowledgement that the man seated silently beside Emily was no longer a passive figure, but the orchestrator of consequence, of measured power, and of the outcome that would define the remainder of the evening. I did not sign. That was the detail that broke Brad first. Not the revelation, not Richard's tone, not the fact that the blue binder had moved across the table like a verdict and landed in front of the man he had been mocking. It was the stillness of my pen above the paper. I could feel his eyes on my hand, waiting for ink, waiting for mercy, waiting for the whole thing to become a misunderstanding he could laugh his way through. But some doors only open one way. Once the truth steps into the room, it does not politely excuse itself. I turned the binder back 3 pages and tapped the compliance addendum with the end of the pen. The revised cost structure includes a 12% reduction in freight contingency, I said. My voice sounded almost too calm, even to me. That is aggressive, but not impossible. What concerns me is the equipment availability report attached to Exhibit C. Brad's throat moved. The finance director looked down so quickly I knew he had seen it too. Emily's eyes narrowed, not at the document, but at Brad, and in that tiny movement I saw the first crack in the team she had trusted more than the man sitting beside her. Richard remained standing, hands folded lightly in front of him, watching the table the way a judge might watch a witness decide whether to keep lying. I slid 1 page free and placed it on the table. This report states Northline has access to 22 dedicated long-haul rigs for the first 90 days of the project. No one spoke. The rain tapped the glass behind us, soft and patient. I looked at Brad. Last Tuesday, after your second bourbon, you told Mr. Pritchard from finance that the actual number was 14. Maybe 15 if a leased fleet came through from Indiana. Brad blinked twice. That was casual conversation. No, I said. That was a material difference. The words did not need volume. They landed clean. Emily turned fully toward him now. Brad. He lifted both palms, a gesture meant to look relaxed and innocent, but it had too much speed in it. It was not like that. We were discussing options. Everybody pads capacity estimates before final allocation. That is normal. Richard's expression did not change, but the air did. The finance director closed his eyes for half a second. That was all the answer I needed. Emily saw it too. Her confidence, the bright polished thing she had worn all evening, began to lose its shape. Did you alter the numbers? She asked. Brad laughed once, dry and thin. Emily, come on. Not here. Not here. Those two words said more than a confession. Not false. Not impossible. Just inconvenient. I watched Emily absorb it, and for the first time that night, the public embarrassment was not mine. It moved across the table and sat beside her, quiet as a guest no one had invited. She had spent the evening making me small in front of people whose approval she wanted. Now those same people were watching her realize she had been standing on a floor someone else had weakened. I should have felt satisfied. I did not. Satisfaction is clean. This felt heavier. This felt like looking at a house I had once loved and noticing smoke behind the upstairs windows. Richard finally spoke. Mr. Lawson, Bennett & Cole does not sign contracts on inflated capacity. Brad looked at him, then at me, then back to Emily, searching for the softest place to land. Emily knew the pressure we were under, he said. There it was. The instinct to share the fall before the fall even finished. Emily's face changed. Not dramatically. No outburst, no tears. Just a tightening around the mouth, a stillness in the eyes. Do not put this on me, she said. Her voice was low, controlled, and for a second I recognized the woman who had built her career by refusing to fold in rooms full of louder people. Then tell them, Brad said. Tell them you did not want the clean version. You wanted the version that won. The sentence struck the room and stayed there. I looked at Emily. She did not look at me. That told me enough, but not everything. Marriage teaches you the difference between guilt and calculation. Guilt looks down. Calculation looks for exits. Emily was doing both. I turned one more page in the binder. Here is what happens now, I said. My hand was steady on the contract, but under the table, my knee had gone cold. Not from fear. From the finality of hearing people reveal themselves when the comfortable script disappears. There will be no signature tonight. Carter Holdings will require a 72-hour review of all capacity claims, subcontractor commitments, and internal communications tied to this proposal. Brad's mouth opened, but Richard cut in before he could speak. That is reasonable. I nodded. Mr. Lawson will be removed from the project team during the review. Brad's face hardened. You cannot do that. I looked at him, and the room seemed to shrink to the width of the table between us. I just did. The words were quiet, but they ended something. Emily's hand moved toward my arm, then stopped before touching me. That hesitation hurt more than the laughter had. She did not know whether she was reaching for her husband or for the man who controlled the contract. For years, I had wondered when those two versions of me became different people in her eyes. Tonight, I had my answer. Richard took the blue binder and closed it halfway, leaving the unsigned page visible. We will reconvene after the review, he said. Chairs shifted. Napkins were placed on the table. People who had laughed earlier now avoided making any sound that might be remembered. Brad pushed back from his seat, his face stiff with wounded pride, and walked out without looking at anyone. Emily stayed seated. So did I. For a few seconds, it was just us in the middle of all that expensive silence. Then she whispered, Michael, I did not know it was you. I turned toward her, feeling the old love and the newer damage standing side by side inside my chest. I know, I said. That was the problem. Emily did not speak again until we were outside, under the black awning where the valets moved through the rain in dark coats and careful steps. The restaurant doors closed behind us with a soft click, sealing away the table, the binder, the faces, the laughter that had died too late. Chicago air hit my lungs cold and clean, the kind of cold that makes everything feel honest. Across the street, headlights slid over wet pavement, yellow taxis hissed through puddles, and the river wind slipped between buildings with no concern for anyone's reputation. Emily stood beside me, arms folded against the weather, her navy dress hidden beneath a camel coat I had bought her for our anniversary 2 years earlier. She had loved it then. Tonight, she wore it like armor. "You let me sit there," she said finally. Her voice was low, but not soft. "You let me walk into that room not knowing." I watched a valet jog toward the curb, water flashing under his shoes. I walked into that room not knowing whether my wife still respected me. She turned toward me. "That is not the same thing." "No," I said. "It is not." The silence between us filled with traffic noise. I could feel her trying to pull the conversation back to ground she understood. Strategy. Damage control. Who knew what and when? But this was not a meeting. There were no slides, no action items, no clever way to rename what had happened. "Michael," she said, and for the first time all night, my name sounded less like a formality and more like something she had misplaced. I was embarrassed. I looked at her then. Of me. Her eyes moved away. That was answer enough. The valet brought her car first, a black Lexus with water beading on the hood. He opened the passenger door, but neither of us moved. Emily took a breath and stared past me toward the restaurant windows. "You do not understand what those rooms are like for me. Every day, I have to prove I belong. Every meeting, every dinner, every call. If I look weak for 1 second, they circle." "And I made you look weak?" I asked. She closed her eyes. "You looked," she stopped. The word hung there, unfinished, more honest because it did not arrive. Small. That was the word she was trying not to say. Ordinary. Harmless. The kind of husband who stands at the edge of a successful woman's life and makes her explain him. I felt the old version of me reach for an apology out of habit. "Sorry I embarrassed you. Sorry I stayed quiet. Sorry my life became inconvenient to your image." But the man who had sat at that table with the unsigned contract in front of him did not move aside for the man who used to shrink just to keep peace. "I built the company that made that contract possible," I said. "I built it before Brad ever learned how to pronounce margin exposure. I built it while you were studying for your certification exams at our kitchen table, when we were eating frozen lasagna, because we were saving for rent. I did not stop being that man because I stopped wearing a badge with my name on it." Her face changed at the mention of those years. Not guilt exactly. Memory. The wet sidewalk gleamed under the streetlights, and for a second I saw us younger, broke, tired, laughing in a one-bedroom apartment with a heater that clanked all night. She had known me then, maybe more than anyone. That was what made the present so hard to forgive. Strangers can underestimate you, and it becomes noise. Your wife does it, and it becomes a room you have to live in. "Why hide it?" she asked. "Why let me think you were just consulting?" "Because when my father got sick, I needed out of the daily fight. Because after the acquisition, the attorneys advised privacy. Because I thought home was the one place I did not have to prove my value every morning." She swallowed. Rain tapped the awning above us. The valet shifted awkwardly by the open car door, pretending not to hear. Emily reached into her purse, pulled out a folded receipt, then put it back without knowing why. A nervous motion from a woman who hated having nothing to hold. "Brad made it sound worse than it was," she said. "No," I replied. "Brad said out loud what you have been implying for years." That landed. I saw it. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, not in surrender, but under the weight of recognition. "That is not fair." "Maybe not," I said, "but it is accurate." She looked at me then, really looked, without the room behind her, without Brad's grin, without Richard's contract binder shaping the air. "I did not know about the numbers," she said. "Not the real numbers. I knew Brad was pushing, and I knew finance was nervous, but I did not know he had put false capacity in the proposal. I wanted to believe that. Part of me did." Emily was ambitious, proud, and careless with kindness when she felt cornered, but she was not stupid. She knew what fraud could do to a career. Still, belief is not a switch. It is a bridge. Ours had missing boards. "Then the review will show that," I said. Her mouth tightened. "And if it does? Then you keep your name clean." "And us?" she asked. There it was. Smaller than the contract. Bigger than the contract. The question she should have asked before laughing. The rain kept falling, patient and unbothered. I looked through the restaurant glass and saw Richard still inside, speaking with his chief legal officer near the empty table. The blue binder was gone. The night had moved on without waiting for our marriage to catch up. "I do not know," I said. Emily flinched. Not much, but enough. She had expected anger. Anger can be negotiated with. She had expected pride. Pride can be flattered. She had not expected uncertainty from a man who used to organize his whole heart around staying. I stepped toward the curb as my pickup arrived behind her Lexus, a dark gray Ford F-150 I still preferred over any town car Carter Holdings could have sent. The valet handed me the keys. Emily stared at the truck, then at me, as if seeing another clue she had ignored for too long. I opened the door and paused. The review starts tomorrow at 9. Michael, she said. I turned. Her voice dropped. Were you testing me tonight? The honest answer was ugly, but not cruel. No, I said. I was giving you a chance to recognize me. Then I got in, closed the door gently, and drove. Into the rain without looking back. The rain had tapered off, leaving the streets glistening like wet glass under the city lights. I drove slowly, the tires humming over slick asphalt, letting the night absorb the tension from the restaurant, the contracts, and the subtle tremors in Emily's expression that had not fully resolved. Streetlights cast long reflections in puddles, broken only by passing cars, and the silence inside my Ford F-150 was absolute except for the soft tick of the dashboard and my own even breathing. Emily's Lexus followed a few car lengths behind, the engine idling, the driver's side window slightly cracked, letting in the crisp night air. I did not look at her. There was nothing left to see in her eyes except reflection, recognition, and the small shock of comprehension that a man she had underestimated controlled more than she realized. I turned onto LaSalle Street, the headlights cutting across empty sidewalks, neon signs in the distance flickering above closed storefronts, and I allowed the night to carry my thoughts back to the early days when ambition had not yet been divided by marriage, by career, or by the unspoken hierarchies of others' expectations. In those days, Emily and I had laughed on linoleum floors in a one-bedroom apartment, sharing takeout, tracking expenses, and imagining the life we would build together. I had known pride then, the quiet, patient kind, not the performative kind she now wore like a shield. The binder, the unsigned contract, the observation of errors, and the small authority Richard had acknowledged had been a culmination of all those years of careful planning, silent work, and unseen oversight. Each mile on the road reminded me of long nights reviewing contracts, examining supplier schedules, and ensuring the structures I had put in place could withstand the pressures others could not imagine. I could feel Emily's presence behind me, not as a source of tension now, but as a quiet reminder of the stakes we had built together, the energy that had been misinterpreted, and the subtle interplay between power, respect, and perception. Every stoplight, every reflection of neon and puddles reminded me that influence is measured not in confrontation, but in control over outcomes, and the room at Mercer's had been the perfect stage for that truth to emerge. Emily finally spoke, her voice subdued but firm. Michael, I cannot believe I underestimated you for so long. I did not reply immediately. The statement did not need validation. She continued, her tone softer now, almost reflective. It changes how I see the contracts, the meetings, everything. I kept my eyes on the road, the traffic lights transitioning in their predictable rhythm, a rhythm I had always preferred, a rhythm that reminded me that patience and timing were the quiet tools of power. That was always the plan, I said finally, not as a boast, but as a simple acknowledgement. Emily exhaled, long and low, as if letting go of years of misplaced assumptions and letting the new understanding settle. The city stretched out before us in quiet patterns, the glimmering reflections on the street like a signal that clarity could exist even after confusion. We reached a bridge crossing the Chicago River, the water below calm, reflecting the city's skyline in distorted brilliance, and I realized that control, observation, and patience had given me something no argument or confrontation could. I parked the F-150 at our apartment garage, the engine clicking off, and waited while Emily pulled her Lexus in beside me. Neither of us moved immediately. The doors clicked in the stillness. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement, oil, and the distant aroma of street food from vendors still open alongside streets. Emily finally stepped out, walked past the truck, and faced me directly, her expression measured, a mixture of acknowledgement, relief, and the first hint of humility. I have to recalibrate how I approach everything, she said. Her words were not a confession. They were the recognition of a new hierarchy, The awareness that the perception she had curated for years no longer dictated outcomes, that competence, timing, and unseen authority mattered more than appearances. I nodded, letting the moment stretch without interruption, letting the gravity of the evening settle. The night air, the wet streets, the quiet hum of city life around us, and the residual energy from the restaurant's revelation created a bubble of stillness in which the past, the present, and the understanding of power converged. Emily exhaled again, and I felt her tension ease fractionally, as though acknowledgement alone could begin to reframe our interactions, our perspectives, and our mutual understanding of what it meant to lead, to influence, and to act with quiet decisiveness. We walked together toward the elevator of our building, the wet pavement reflecting our steps in parallel lines, neither rushing, both moving forward, aware that tonight had shifted the measure of respect, authority, and the quiet strength that defined who I had become. The elevator hummed as it carried us upward, the mirrored walls reflecting our expressions with quiet clarity. I watched Emily's reflection, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight narrowing of her eyes, a silent assessment of the man beside her. The lights flickered softly with each floor, creating small, shifting patterns on the walls, like a slow-motion spotlight on the unspoken truths that had unfolded hours earlier. We were alone, the space between us vast yet intimate, carrying all the weight of observation, authority, and acknowledgement. Outside, the city pulsed with life, the distant sound of tires on wet pavement and the occasional honk reminding me that the world continued, indifferent to revelations or shifts in hierarchy. Emily turned slightly toward me, her posture relaxing fractionally, but still wary, as if the night's events had recalibrated her understanding of control and competence. "I did not realize how much you had kept hidden," she said softly, almost to herself, almost as a question. I nodded, keeping my gaze forward, hands resting lightly on my lap. "It was never about hiding," I replied. "It was about maintaining stability, ensuring decisions were made thoughtfully and with oversight that would not be compromised by emotion or perception." She exhaled, a slow release, the kind that carries both relief and recognition. The elevator slowed, arriving at our floor with a soft ding that echoed faintly through the shaft. I moved toward the door, hand on the rail, aware of the quiet rhythm of the moment. Emily followed, stepping out carefully, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The lobby was nearly empty, the janitor finishing rounds with a mop in one hand and a spray bottle in the other, a mundane ritual contrasting with the extraordinary shifts that had occurred less than an hour ago. I led the way to the entrance, the doorman tipping his hat with practiced politeness, oblivious to the nuanced hierarchy that had just been reaffirmed. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, carrying a chill from the river, tugging gently at Emily's coat. The city lights glimmered off the wet streets, casting long, fractured reflections that danced beneath our feet. She glanced at me again, hesitating, caught between words unsaid and acknowledgement deferred. "Do you ever regret stepping back?" she asked, voice quieter than before, more reflective than challenging. I considered the question, the distance, the rain, the echoes of the restaurant, and the quiet power that had been claimed without noise or spectacle. "No," I said finally, "because control and influence are not always visible. Sometimes they are simply understood by those willing to observe and respect it." Emily's lips pressed together, a subtle nod acknowledging the truth, the weight of the lesson, the recalibration of assumptions. We moved toward our respective vehicles, the rain having slowed to a gentle mist, the streets glistening like dark glass. I unlocked my Ford F-150, the door clicking as I slid inside, and waited while Emily approached her Lexus. The space between vehicles was charged with understanding, respect, and a mutual recognition of the evening's lessons. She lingered, eyes not meeting mine fully, but acknowledging that the man she had underestimated for years was neither diminished nor reliant on her validation. I started the engine, the vehicle vibrating softly beneath me, a tangible reminder of presence and control. Emily sat behind the wheel of her car, engine running, the interior light illuminating her thoughtful expression. She did not speak. She did not need to. The air between us carried the gravity of the night, the lessons, and the quiet power balance. I rolled forward slowly, leaving the apartment building behind, the wet streets reflecting the city lights, creating paths of fractured color, guiding me through the quiet night. Emily followed at a respectful distance, both of us navigating the familiar streets with new awareness. Each block, each intersection, each reflection on the pavement reminded me that authority, patience, and measured action create outcomes far more lasting than immediate confrontation. The city slept lightly around us, unaware of the careful calibration of power and recognition that had occurred within its midst. I allowed the rhythm of the night to set the pace, the hum of the engine, the glimmer of the streetlights, and the misted reflections carrying the memory of restraint, foresight, and silent assertion. Emily's car eventually faded behind me as we reached the main avenue, the glow of downtown Chicago stretching ahead, a canvas of possibilities, decisions, and the quiet knowledge that tonight had shifted the balance not with noise or spectacle, but with precision, patience, and the calm execution of authority. By the time I reached the office the next morning, the streets were still damp with the mist from last night, the city bathed in the soft glow of early streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. I parked the F-150 in the reserved spot, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out, my shoes clicking softly against the concrete. Emily's Lexus had not moved, a quiet indication that she had taken the night to think, to recalibrate, to absorb what had happened. I carried the blue binder with me as I walked toward the entrance, the weight of it light in my hands but significant in consequence, each page a record of oversight, authority, and the control I had silently exercised for years. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and polished stone, the janitor finishing rounds with his mop in the corner, oblivious to the power dynamics unfolding just minutes before. I swiped my keycard, the magnetic strip clicking, the door opening to a quiet office corridor, my footsteps soft against the polished floor. The elevators hummed. In the background, a muted soundtrack to the gravity of my thoughts. I placed the binder on the conference table, the familiar scent of paper and ink mingling with the early morning air. Richard Bennett arrived shortly after, his calm presence filling the room without effort, his eyes meeting mine with the subtle acknowledgement that last night's events had been understood and accepted at the highest level. Emily entered a few moments later, her expression composed but thoughtful, eyes tracing the binder, then glancing at me, as if measuring the space between the man she had misjudged and the authority he quietly wielded. The room settled into a rhythm of quiet anticipation, the kind that comes when everyone present knows that decisions will be informed, deliberate, and irreversible. I opened the binder to the relevant page, reviewing the compliance schedules, capacity allocations, and contractual clauses, each line familiar, each number a marker of the unseen diligence I had maintained. Emily watched, silent, as I made a few notations, small and deliberate, ensuring clarity and precision in every adjustment. Richard nodded occasionally, the motion subtle but affirming, a quiet reinforcement of the structure we were putting in place. Brad Lawson had been removed from the review process, his absence a silent testament to accountability, and the team collectively understood the new order without confrontation. I sensed Emily processing the magnitude of the situation, the realization that my presence, calm and measured, had dictated outcomes without dramatics or public declarations. She shifted slightly, crossing her arms, then uncrossing them, her posture a reflection of thought and acknowledgement rather than confrontation. I spoke then, my voice steady, carrying authority without flourish. The review will proceed in a structured manner. All documents will be cross-checked, and final authorization will be my responsibility. Any discrepancies will be addressed immediately, and approvals will be contingent on full transparency. Emily nodded slowly, comprehension settling in without the need for overt commentary. Richard Bennett leaned back slightly, observing, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, an acknowledgement of the efficiency and quiet power at work. I closed the binder with care, placing it back on the table, the click of the cover marking the transition from potential to action. Emily stepped closer, her voice softer now, reflective. I understand now, she said, not just about the contract, but about how you operate, how you observe, how you influence. I acknowledged her insight with a brief nod, the air between us heavy with unspoken understanding. The city outside remained quiet, mist curling over sidewalks and streets, and I knew that the framework we had established within the office, reinforced by last night's revelations, would guide not only the outcome of the contract but the respect, boundaries, and perception of authority for all involved. Emily exhaled, a mixture of relief and reflection, and stepped back, allowing the gravity of the moment to fully register. I stood beside the table, binder closed, hands at my sides, the weight of responsibility, preparation, and quiet power fully recognized by everyone in the room. The early morning light streamed through the windows, glinting off the polished surfaces, illuminating the subtle changes in posture, expression, and understanding. The balance had shifted decisively, yet without spectacle, leaving clarity, authority, and measured respect in its wake, and the city beyond, oblivious, continued to move, carrying with it the echoes of a night and morning where silent command and preparation had reshaped perception, accountability, and the quiet assertion of true influence.